I was opening my birthday presents when my mother whispered to me, "Smile or you will die." My hand froze on the wrapping paper of the third gift, a rectangular box from my Aunt Gabriella, who was standing across the living room sipping champagne and watching me with an expression I couldn't read. My mother's breath was hot against my ear, her fingers digging into my shoulder with enough force to leave bruises. I forced my face into a smile and kept tearing the paper, revealing a jewelry box. Inside was a gold bracelet with small charms dangling from it. I held it up and thanked Aunt Gabriella, my voice sounding strange and distant. My mother's grip loosened slightly but didn't release. She leaned in again and whispered even quieter. "There are 2 men by the door. They have guns. If you stop smiling, if you cry, if you do anything except act like this is the best birthday of your life, they will kill everyone in this room, starting with your little brother." I looked at my brother Carlo, who was 7 years old and playing with a toy car on the carpet, completely oblivious to whatever nightmare was unfolding. My hands started shaking and my mother squeezed my shoulder harder. "Steady. Open the next present." I reached for another gift, this one from my father, who was standing near the kitchen talking to Uncle Vincent about something that made them both laugh. My father looked normal, relaxed, genuinely happy. He had no idea. Or did he? I tore open the wrapping with hands I couldn't quite control and found a leather journal with my initials embossed on the cover. My father smiled at me and called across the room. "For all those stories you're always writing, Juliana, now you can keep them somewhere nice." I held up the journal and smiled wider, thanked him, told him it was perfect. My mother's grip finally released and she moved away, circulating among the guests with a champagne flute in her hand and a bright smile on her face. I stayed on the couch surrounded by half-opened presents and wrapping paper, looking around the room at 20 people who'd come to celebrate my 17th birthday. Which ones were the men with guns? I scanned faces, looking for anything suspicious, anyone who didn't belong. Everyone looked normal. Neighbors, relatives, family friends, all people I'd known my entire life. My best friend Zara sat down next to me and picked up one of the unopened presents. "You okay? You look pale." I forced another smile and said I was fine, just overwhelmed by everyone being so generous. Zara studied my face for a moment longer, then shrugged and started telling me about the party she was planning for next weekend. I nodded and made appropriate sounds, but wasn't really listening. I was watching my mother move through the crowd, touching shoulders, laughing at jokes, refilling drinks. She looked so normal, so composed, like she hadn't just told me people would die if I stopped performing happiness. My eyes found the men by the door, 2 of them standing close together, both wearing dark suits, both watching the room with careful attention. I'd never seen them before. They weren't relatives or neighbors or family friends. They were strangers at my birthday party, and apparently they were armed. One of them met my eyes and his expression didn't change, but something in his gaze made my blood go cold. I looked away quickly and opened another present. The party continued for another hour. People ate cake, sang happy birthday, took photos. I smiled in every single one, my face aching from the sustained expression. My mother stayed close, always within touching distance, her eyes constantly flicking to the 2 men by the door. When the first guests started leaving, my mother announced it was getting late and thanked everyone for coming. People began gathering coats and purses, saying goodbye, hugging me and wishing me happy birthday one more time. The 2 men by the door didn't move. They waited until everyone else had left, until it was just our family and them. Then one of them spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Rossetti, we need to talk." His voice was flat, emotionless. My mother's smile finally dropped and she looked at my father. "Take the children upstairs." My father's confused expression made it clear he really hadn't known anything was wrong. "What's going on? Who are these men?" The second man pulled his jacket open slightly, revealing a gun in a shoulder holster. "Upstairs, now." My father grabbed Carlo and me, pushing us toward the stairs. I looked back at my mother, who was standing very still, her hands clasped in front of her, facing the 2 armed men in our living room. We went upstairs and my father closed Carlo in his bedroom, telling him to stay there and play quietly. Then he pulled me into my parents' bedroom and closed that door too. His hands were shaking and his face had gone white. "What the hell is happening? Who are those men? Why did your mother tell me to bring you upstairs?" I told him what my mother had whispered to me during the present opening, about the guns, about the threat to kill everyone. My father sat down hard on the bed and put his face in his hands. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. I should have known. God, I should have seen the signs. He stood and started pacing. "Your mother's been acting strange for months, taking weird phone calls, going out at odd hours, being secretive about money. I thought maybe she was planning something for you, for your birthday or graduation. I thought it was something good." I asked him what he thought was really happening and he stopped pacing. I don't know. But men with guns showing up at our house, threatening our family, that's not nothing. That's serious. That's organized crime or worse. He pulled out his phone and I grabbed his wrist. What are you doing? He said he was calling the police and I told him to wait, that if those men heard him calling, they might start shooting. My father's face went even paler, but he put the phone down. We stood there in silence, listening to muffled voices from downstairs. My mother's voice, calm and measured. The men's voices, harder to make out. Then footsteps on the stairs. My father moved in front of me instinctively, putting himself between me and the door. My mother opened it without knocking. She looked at my father and said 3 words. They're gone now. My father demanded to know what was going on, who those men were, why they'd threatened our family. My mother closed the door behind her and leaned against it. Sit down, both of you. I need to explain something. My mother told us she'd been working for a criminal organization for the past 3 years, not voluntarily. She'd made a mistake years ago, borrowed money from the wrong people to pay for my grandfather's medical bills when he was dying. The interest had compounded impossibly fast, and when she couldn't pay, they'd given her a choice. Work for them, or they'd kill our entire family. So she'd worked for them. Her job was simple but illegal. She managed a front company that laundered money through real estate transactions. Millions of dollars flowing through fake property sales, ghost buyers, shell corporations. She signed documents, processed transfers, made everything look legitimate. She'd done it for 3 years without telling anyone, carrying the weight of it alone. The men who'd come to our house tonight were her handlers, checking on her, making sure she was still compliant. The threat to kill everyone if I stopped smiling had been real. They'd been testing her control over the family, making sure we didn't know anything, making sure she could keep us in line. My father stood up so fast the bed frame creaked. You've been laundering money for 3 years? Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand the danger you've put this family in? My mother's composure finally cracked and she started crying. I had no choice. They showed me photos of Carlo getting picked up from school. They showed me Juliana walking home from the library. They knew everything about our routines, our lives. They said if I went to the police, if I told anyone, they'd make it look like accidents. They'd kill all of you and I'd be the last one alive to suffer with it. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I did it to protect you. I did it to keep you alive. Every single day for 3 years I've done things I hate, processed money for drug dealers and human traffickers and worse, because the alternative was losing my family. My father's anger seemed to drain out of him and he sat down again. How much money are we talking about? My mother said she'd processed approximately $40 million through various accounts and properties over the past 3 years. The organization paid her $50,000 a year, deposited into an offshore account she couldn't access without their permission. Every transaction was documented, every signature recorded. If she tried to run or go to the police, they had enough evidence to put her in prison for decades while they killed the rest of us. I asked why they'd come to my birthday party specifically, and my mother said it was a routine check, something they did every few months to remind her what was at stake. They'd show up at family events, at Christmas or birthdays or school performances, and sit there watching to make sure everything looked normal and happy. To make sure my mother hadn't told anyone, hadn't broken down, hadn't tried to escape. Today they'd added the extra test of telling my mother to whisper that threat to me, to see if I'd panic or stay calm. If I'd panicked, if I'd started crying or tried to run, it would have meant my mother had lost control of the situation and they would have eliminated the problem. My father asked what stopped them from just killing us anyway once my mother was no longer useful. My mother said she'd been asking herself that same question for 3 years. She thought the answer was that she was very good at her job and they didn't want to lose a reliable asset. But eventually they would decide she knew too much or had become a liability, and then we'd all be dead. So what do we do? My father asked. My mother said she didn't know. I said we needed to go to the FBI, that we needed protection, that staying silent was just waiting to die. My mother shook her head. The organization has people inside local police departments. I've seen the payments, processed the bribes. I don't know how high it goes or who can be trusted. If we go to the wrong person, we're dead within hours. My father suggested we could run, leave the state, change our names. My mother said they'd find us. The organization had international reach, contacts in dozens of countries. They demonstrated that reach by showing her surveillance photos from various locations, some taken in other states during vacations we'd taken, proving they could track us anywhere. We were trapped. I stood up and paced the same path my father had earlier. There had to be a way out. There had to be someone we could trust. I stopped and turned to face my mother. You have documentation of everything you've processed, right? Every transaction, every shell company, every property? My mother nodded. It's all digital, stored on encrypted servers I don't have direct access to. But I have copies of some documents, receipts and contracts and transfer records. I told her we needed to get everything she had, compile it into evidence packets, and find someone in federal law enforcement we could trust. Not local police, not state police, but FBI or DEA or someone high enough that local corruption wouldn't matter. My father said that sounded reasonable, but dangerous. If the organization found out we were gathering evidence, they'd kill us before we could use it. My mother said they monitored her computer access constantly. If she started downloading files or copying documents beyond normal work activity, it would raise red flags. I thought about it and came up with a plan that might work. I was 17, nearly 18. I had my own computer, my own social media, my own digital life. If I could access my mother's work files through her accounts and copy them using my own devices, it might not raise the same flags. My mother looked doubtful but said it was possible the monitoring focused on her official computers, rather than looking for access from family devices. She could give me her login credentials and I could start downloading files slowly, spreading it out over weeks to avoid detection. My father said this was insane, that we were talking about putting our daughter in danger. I said I was already in danger, that we all were, and doing nothing guaranteed we'd eventually die. At least this way we had a chance. My mother stared at me for a long moment, then wrote down several passwords and account names on a piece of paper. Start tonight. Download whatever you can, financial records especially, anything showing the money trail. We need to prove where the money came from and where it went. That's what will interest federal prosecutors. She handed me the paper and I folded it into my pocket. My father said we also needed to identify who was in charge locally, who our mother reported to, what the organization's structure looked like, names, photos, addresses if possible. The more comprehensive our evidence, the more likely federal agents would take it seriously and provide protection. We spent the next hour planning, strategizing, trying to think of every angle and risk. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight and Carlo had fallen asleep in his room. My mother carried him to his bed and my father went downstairs to clean up the remains of the party. I went to my own room and opened my laptop. The login credentials my mother had given me worked on the first try. I found myself looking at a corporate interface for something called Meridian Property Solutions, a real estate investment firm that existed only on paper. The files were organized by date and transaction type. I started downloading the most recent files first, saving them to an external hard drive I'd hidden in my closet. Financial spreadsheets, property deeds, transfer documents, corporate registration papers. Every file represented money being cleaned, criminal proceeds being transformed into legitimate assets. I worked for 3 hours, downloading hundreds of documents, organizing them into folders by year and transaction type. My eyes burned and my back ached, but I kept going. Around 3 a.m., I finally stopped and hid the hard drive in a hollowed-out book on my shelf. Tomorrow I'd download more. Every day I'd chip away at the digital trail until we had everything. Then we'd figure out who to trust with it. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, replaying my mother's whispered threat. Smile or you will die. For 3 years, she'd been living with that kind of pressure, carrying that weight alone, protecting us through compliance. Now I understood why she'd looked tired all the time, why she'd been distant at family dinners, why she'd started drinking more wine in the evenings. The next morning, I went to school like normal, sat through classes, ate lunch with Zara, pretended everything was fine, but I was constantly aware of my surroundings, watching for anyone who might be watching me. Were any of these people connected to the organization? Were any of my teachers or classmates on their payroll? How deep did the corruption go? After school, I went straight home and locked myself in my room, downloading more files. I found email correspondence between my mother and someone named Frank Delacroix, who appeared to be her direct supervisor. His emails were cold and professional, discussing properties and transactions in coded language that was obviously about money laundering. I copied everything and kept digging. Over the next 2 weeks, I downloaded thousands of files, building a comprehensive picture of the organization's operations. They weren't just laundering money. They were running a multi-state criminal enterprise involving drug trafficking, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and protection rackets. The real estate laundering was just one piece of a much larger operation. My mother's role was bigger than she'd admitted. She wasn't just processing transactions, she was managing the entire northeastern property portfolio. I showed my father what I'd found, and he immediately said we needed help beyond what we could do ourselves. This wasn't just local crime. This was organized crime on a massive scale. We needed federal protection and prosecution. He started researching FBI field offices, trying to determine which one might be least likely to have corrupt agents. He finally settled on the Boston office, reasoning that it was far enough from our city to be outside the organization's immediate sphere of influence, but close enough that we could reach it if needed. He made contact through an anonymous email, describing the situation in vague terms and asking for a secure way to communicate. 3 days later, he received a response from a senior agent named Catherine Wu, who said she specialized in organized crime cases and was willing to meet confidentially to assess the information. My father arranged a meeting at a public location, a restaurant in Boston where we'd be surrounded by people. We drove up on a Saturday, telling my mother we were going shopping for college visits. She knew what we were really doing and spent the entire morning looking terrified. Agent Wu was in her 40s, professional and direct. She sat across from us in a booth at the back of the restaurant and asked to see what we had. My father handed over a thumb drive containing copies of about 1,000 documents. Agent Wu pulled out a laptop and started reviewing files right there at the table. Her expression changed as she read, going from skeptical interest to intense focus. After 30 minutes, she looked up and said 3 words. "This is massive." She explained that the documents showed an organized crime network operating across 6 states with connections to international cartels. The money laundering alone represented hundreds of millions of dollars. But more importantly, the files included names, dates, and specific transactions that could be corroborated with federal investigations already underway. This wasn't just evidence. This was the keystone that could bring down the entire organization. She asked how we'd obtained the documents, and my father explained everything: my mother's forced involvement, the threats to our family, the 3 years of coercion. Agent Wu listened without interrupting, then asked if my mother would be willing to testify. My father said yes, but only with protection for the entire family. Agent Wu said she could arrange that, but it would require my mother to wear a wire to continue her work with the organization while gathering additional evidence and recordings. We'd all have to maintain normal appearances for potentially several more months while the FBI built their case. The alternative was to extract us immediately into witness protection, but that would tip off the organization and they'd destroy evidence and flee before the FBI could move. My father asked which option Agent Wu recommended, and she was blunt. "The wire gives us the strongest case but puts your family at maximum risk. Extraction keeps you safe but lets criminals escape justice. Your choice." I said we should do the wire. My father looked at me in shock. "Juliana, no, that's too dangerous." I argued that we'd already been living in danger for 3 years and would continue living in danger forever unless we helped stop these people. Agent Wu nodded slowly and said she'd seen this choice many times and there was no perfect answer. "But I will say this: informants who help build the case and testify often feel less powerless, less victimized. They take back control by actively fighting the people who hurt them." My father finally agreed, and Agent Wu laid out a plan. She'd equip my mother with sophisticated recording equipment that couldn't be detected through normal security sweeps. My mother would continue her work, but every meeting, every phone call, every transaction would be recorded. We'd have weekly check-ins through secure channels. If at any point the situation became too dangerous, we'd be extracted immediately into protective custody. The operation would likely take 4 to 6 months, depending on how quickly they could corroborate evidence and secure additional warrants. We drove home that night with the weight of the decision heavy on all of us. My father kept second-guessing himself, wondering if we'd made the right choice, if we should have just run. I told him Agent Wu was right, that this was taking back control. My mother said nothing, just stared out the window at the dark highway. When we got home, Carlo was already asleep and the house felt empty and cold. We sat in the living room and my mother finally spoke. "I should have told you 3 years ago. I should have trusted that we could find a solution together instead of trying to protect you through lies." My father took her hand. "You did what you thought was right. That's all anyone can do." Agent Wu came to our house 3 days later, late at night after Carlo was asleep. She brought recording equipment, tiny devices that my mother could wear concealed in jewelry or clothing. She taught my mother how to activate them, how to position herself for best audio quality, how to act natural while documenting everything. My mother practiced for an hour, role-playing conversations while Agent Wu monitored the feed. Finally, Agent Wu seemed satisfied and said my mother was ready. The first recorded meeting happened 2 days later. My mother met Frank Delacroix at a restaurant to discuss new property acquisitions. She wore a necklace with a hidden microphone and kept her phone positioned in her purse to provide backup recording. Delacroix discussed 3 new properties in detail, explaining exactly how the money would flow and which shell companies would be used. He mentioned names of people higher in the organization, referred to someone called the architect who designed the financial structures. When my mother came home that night, she looked drained but determined. She said the recording had worked perfectly and she'd gotten everything. Agent Wu called an hour later to confirm she'd received the encrypted file and the evidence was excellent. Over the next 3 months, my mother recorded dozens of meetings. She documented money flows, named conspirators, captured discussions about criminal operations beyond the money laundering. The organization used her real estate network to hide assets for drug dealers, to purchase properties for illegal gambling operations, to create fronts for human trafficking. My mother had been unknowingly facilitating all of it through her legitimate-seeming work. Each revelation made her more committed to seeing the operation through. She told me one night that she'd spent 3 years feeling like a victim, powerless and afraid. Now she felt like a weapon, like every conversation she recorded was ammunition against the people who'd terrorized our family. My father worried constantly, convinced every day that something would go wrong and we'd be discovered. But my mother maintained her perfect performance. Smiling, compliant, competent employee managing millions in illegal assets while wearing a wire. The organization never suspected. At school, I kept downloading files, kept organizing evidence, kept maintaining the appearance of normal teenage life. Zara asked me once why I'd been so distant lately, and I told her I was stressed about college applications. The lie came easily after months of practice. In month 4, Agent Wu called an emergency meeting. She said the FBI had gathered enough evidence to begin arrests, but needed one final piece. They'd identified the architect as someone named Vincent Calabrese, a financial genius who'd designed money laundering networks for multiple criminal organizations. He was careful, never attended meetings in person, never spoke on phones that could be traced. But they knew he was scheduled to inspect my mother's operation in person next week, a rare appearance to ensure everything was running smoothly. If my mother could record a meeting with Calabrese, if she could get him to discuss the operation in his own words, it would be the final nail in the prosecution's case. My father immediately said no, that Calabrese would be more careful and suspicious than anyone else my mother had dealt with. Agent Wu agreed it was risky, but said the evidence would be invaluable. My mother said she'd do it. My father argued with her for an hour, but she wouldn't change her mind. I've come this far. I'm not stopping now. Agent Wu said she'd have agents positioned nearby in case extraction became necessary. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at my mother's office. That Wednesday, I couldn't focus on anything at school. Every class felt interminable, every moment stretched like torture. I kept checking my phone even though I knew no one would contact me until it was over. Finally, the dismissal bell rang and I practically ran to my car. I drove home to find my father pacing in the kitchen, his phone clutched in his hand. No news yet. We waited in terrible silence. Carlo was at a friend's house, kept away from the tension filling our home. At 4:30, my father's phone rang. Agent Wu, he put it on speaker and we heard her say 2 words. It's done. My mother had recorded a 30-minute conversation with Vincent Calabrese. He'd discussed the entire operation in detail, named associates, explained the structure, revealed connections to international cartels. The evidence was perfect, and now FBI agents were executing simultaneous raids across 6 states, arresting over 70 people, seizing properties and assets, dismantling the organization piece by piece. My mother was safe. We were all safe. It was over. My father started crying, actual tears streaming down his face as he thanked Agent Wu over and over. My mother came home an hour later with 2 FBI agents as escort. She looked exhausted, but there was something different in her expression. Relief, maybe, or pride. She'd done it. She'd spent 3 years as a victim and 4 months as an informant, and now she was free. The agents said we'd need to testify at trials, that the legal process would take years, but the immediate danger was over. The men who'd threatened us at my birthday party had been arrested. Frank Delacroix was in custody. Vincent Calabrese was in custody. The entire leadership structure was destroyed. We spent that evening together, all 4 of us including Carlo, who we finally told an age-appropriate version of what had been happening. He didn't fully understand, but he knew Mom had been very brave and everything was okay now. We ordered pizza and watched a movie and tried to feel normal for the first time in months. Later that night, I found my mother sitting alone on the back porch, staring at the sky. I sat next to her and asked if she was okay. She said she didn't know yet, that 3 years of fear and 4 months of terror didn't just evaporate because arrests had been made. She'd need therapy probably. We'd all need therapy. But we were alive and free, and that was more than she dared hope for. The trial started 8 months later. My mother testified in 3 separate cases, describing in detail how she'd been coerced into laundering money, how the organization had threatened our family, how she'd worn a wire for 4 months gathering evidence. The defense attorneys tried to paint her as a willing participant, a criminal who'd only cooperated when caught. But the recordings told the truth. You could hear the fear in her voice during those first coerced meetings, hear how the threats had shaped her compliance. The juries convicted on nearly every count. Vincent Calabrese received a 40-year sentence. Frank Delacroix got 25 years. The men who'd come to my birthday party got 15 years each. Over 60 people went to prison, and the organization's assets were seized, approximately $80 million that would be used to compensate victims of their various criminal enterprises. Agent Wu told us afterward that our cooperation had been instrumental in one of the largest organized crime takedowns in the region's history. My mother had helped put away people who'd hurt hundreds of other families beyond ours. A year after the arrests, my mother started a nonprofit organization helping other victims of coerced crime, people who'd been forced to participate in illegal activities through threats to their families. She knew firsthand the powerlessness and shame of that situation, knew how difficult it was to come forward when you'd technically committed crimes yourself. Her organization provided legal assistance, counseling, and advocacy for people trying to escape similar circumstances. She gave talks at law enforcement conferences, helped train agents to recognize signs of coercion versus willing participation. She transformed her experience into purpose. My father said she was the strongest person he'd ever known. I agreed. I'd watched her carry an impossible weight alone for 3 years, then risk everything to stop the people who'd enslaved her. That took courage I couldn't fully comprehend. I finished high school, went to college, majored in criminal justice. Wanted to understand the systems that had both failed and eventually protected my family. Wanted to help fix those systems so fewer people fell through the cracks. On my 18th birthday, I thought about my 17th, about opening presents while my mother whispered threats and armed men watched. How that moment had revealed everything and started our path toward freedom. Sometimes the worst moments contain the seeds of salvation, and sometimes smiling through terror is the first step toward fighting back. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.
Story number 1. My parents told me to pack my things because the house belongs to your sisters now. So I called my lawyer on speaker. Dad's face went pale. Mom reached for the phone like she could somehow stop what was coming. Raina, my lawyer voice filled the kitchen. You ready? Yeah. Can you explain to my parents what happened when someone tried to evict the legal owner of a property? Silence. My mom's coffee mug froze. Halfway to her lips, well, Raina said cheerfully, that would be illegal, particularly when the owner has documentation proving she's purchased the property outright 3 years ago. I watched my parents' face cycle through confusion, Daniel, and then pure rage. Pure rage. My sister Natalie emerged from the hallway looking smug until she heard Raina's next words. Also, did anyone forge Olivia's signature on documents recently? Because that would be fraud. Here's the thing about being the family disappointment. People underestimate you. While my sister was getting her third useless degree on my parents' name, I was working 60 hours weeks in tech. While the posted Instagram stories about Natalie's engagement, I was saving every penny, and while they assume I never amount to anything, I bought his house from my grandparents before they died. Grandma pulled me aside 2 months before the cancer took her. Your parents will try to give everything to your sister. She said, let me sell you the house for $1. We'll do it legally. I paid the dollar. We, we filled the deed. Grandma died knowing she protected something from my parents' golden child syndrome. For 3 years, I let them believe they inherited this place. I paid property taxes anonymously, made repairs, even let them move in when Dad claimed his apartment was too expensive. They had no idea I owned every brick. The Natalie's engagement fell apart. My sister came crawling home, and my parents' solution was to give her my house. Natalie needs stability. My mom announced that morning, you are single. You can rent somewhere. I'd almost laugh. Natalie had been handed everything and squandered it all. College fund, 2 cars, 3 credit cards my parents paid off without question. So I need to leave by when? I asked calmly, end of the week. Dad said, we already told Natalie she can move in. That's when I made the call. Just to clarify, Anna continued. Olivia owns this property, has owned it since 2019. Any attempt to remove her would require legal eviction, which would fail. Should I continue? This is insane. My sister shrieked, Grandma left this house to mom and dad. Actually, I said, pulling out my folder. Grandma sold it to me. Here's the deed. Notarized, recorded with the country. I've been paying property taxes for 3 years. I slid the documents across the table. Watch my parents' hands shake as they read. You manipulated her. Mom whispered. She was dying. She was lucid. The lawyer confirmed it. So did her doctor. My dad's face turned crimson. You let us leave her knowing you owned it. You assumed you owned it and never claimed otherwise. Legally, you've been my tenant for 6 months. That word landed like a bomb. Tenants, which means Raina said. Olivia can ask you to leave with proper notice. Where, where your parents? Mom said. Tears starting. Your parents who just told me to pack my things and leave my own house. Parents who forgot my graduation twice. Used my college funds to buy Natalia car. When I got promoted, you asked when I settled down like my sister. The kitchen smelled smaller suddenly. Natalie was crying. Dad stared at the deed like it might change. I want you out in 30 days. I said that's more notice than you gave me. They moved out 29 days later. Natalie found an apartment she could actually afford. My parents stopped calling after I didn't return. Their first 15 messages. Last month, she sent Christmas card addressed to occupant. I hang it on my fridge, in my house, in my kitchen, under my roof. I made me smile. It made me smile every single day. Story number two. My mother in law said you are hosting Thanksgiving again, right? After 8 years of me cooking while you watched, so I said no. And chaos followed. It started innocently enough when Brent and I got married. His mother, Dolores, suggested I host our first Thanksgiving together. It will be so intimate. She couldn't just immediate family. I should have known better when 18 people showed up. Immediate family apparently included second cousin and Dolores book club franchise. I cooked for 3 days straight. Turkey, ham, 7 sides, four pies. Meanwhile, Dolores sat in my living room criticizing my throw pillows while her sister Beatrice complained about the water pressure in my guest bathroom. Brand's dad, Howard, parked himself in front of my TV watching football. When I asked Brand for help, he said, "You are going great, baby," and, and returned to the game. After dinner, I started clearing prayers. Dolores stopped me. Leave them, you have done enough. I was touched until I realized she meant I should leave them until tomorrow so I could properly clean. After everyone left, they stayed until midnight, drinking my wine and debating whether my grave was too thick. This became the traditions every year. Dolores would call in October. We are so excited for Thanksgiving at your place again. No question, no asking, just assuming. And every year I spent days cooking while he arrived empty-handed, ate, critiqued, and left me with disaster. By year 4, I tried suggesting we rotate house. Dolores clutched her chest like I stabbed her. But you are so good at hosting, she said. Beside my kitchen is being renovated. It wasn't it. Year 5, I hinted that potluck style might be nice. Beatrice laughed. Oh, honey, we couldn't possibly compete with your cooking. Then spent 20 minutes explaining why my stuffing needed more say. Last month, Dolores called. You are hosting Thanksgiving again, right? Something inside me snapped. 8 years of playing servant while he acted like guest at a restaurant. 8 years of brand promising to help, then vanishing. 8 years of criticism disguised as compliments. No, I said silence. Dad, shocked silence. I'm sorry, what? I'm not hosting this year. We'll be traveling. We weren't, but she didn't need to know that traveling on Thanksgiving. Her voice claimed 3 octaves. But it's tradition. You are welcome to host. It's yours. I said sweetly. Or betrayed, she spotted. I can't possibly. My house isn't set up for. I hang up. Brent came home to 7 missed calls. What did you say to my mother? She told him I destroyed Thanksgiving and probably their family. That I was selfish and ungrateful. When I asked what exactly they have done besides eat my food and insult my home, he didn't have an answer. Dolores launched a campaign she called Brent's siblings, painting me as the villain. Beatrick posted on social media about honoring your elders. Howard left me a voicemail saying I was disrespectful. Brand begged me to reconsider it just one day. Can't you do can't you do this for me? I looked at him, really looked at him. 8 years of watching him side with his mother. 8 years of him promising things would be different. I have done this for 8 years. I said quietly, for you, what have you done for me? He didn't answer. Thanksgiving morning arrived. I made reservations at a nice restaurant just for me. I wore my favorite dress, ordered expensive wine, and ate a peaceful meal alone while my phone exploded with messages. Dolores had attempted to host last minute and ordered restaurant market. Serving it on a paper plate, betrays called it disappointing. Howard left early. I blocked them all and ordered tea. When I got home, Brent was on the couch looking miserable. My mom cried. He said, I am sure she did. She said, you are tearing our family apart. I made one decision for myself in 8 years. If that tears your family apart, the problem isn't me. He started at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. 3 days later, I filed for divorce. Turned out when you finally say no to one thing, it gets easier to say no to everything that doesn't serve.